Being a new preacher and preaching for the first time is exciting, but also pretty nerve-wracking. And so in this episode of Practical Church Planting, we want to share with you 5 tips for new preachers.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Androsian. Joining me is Dylan Dotson. And today we're going to give you 5 tips for new preachers.
Yeah, so if you've never preached before, or you're about to preach your first sermon, or you're relatively new to it, just things that I learned over the years that maybe some of these things are just good to be reminded of, or maybe you just didn't know that you should do these things, because there's lots of advice, sometimes good, sometimes bad, about preaching.
Yep.
So I don't know if ours is good or bad.
Hopefully it's at least medium.
That's right. Here are 5 medium to above average tips. Great. Number 1, and we talk about this a lot, this will not be a surprise if you listen to this podcast, is go through it out loud. So you want to actually not just like read it, because you read faster, and also when you read, we've said this before, something might sound good on paper that does not sound good when you actually say it. And so especially if you're newer, I mean, I still do this today. It looks different the more I preach. Sometimes I kind of will skip through a part or section just because I've done this. I mean, we've launched over 2.5 years ago, and I preach every week pretty much. Not every week, but you know what I mean. But if you're just starting, go through it out loud. It doesn't necessarily have to be in front of somebody, although that's fine. But go through it out loud so you can see what it actually sounds like.
Yeah, you'll find that there are way more, especially if you're coming up on your first time. Obviously, over time you won't find this as much, but there's probably going to be way more awkward transitions or points that you thought were going to be really good until you actually say it out loud. That's really not than you realize. Yep. I know when I first started preaching, and before the first few times I did, it was like when I come to kind of transitioning maybe from one point to the next, or maybe I moving from saying something into a story that I want to tell. If I didn't say it out loud, like the first time I went through and said it out loud, I realized this is really awkward. I don't have anything to say between there, and you kind of iron those things out over time. But yeah, there's a lot more kind of just awkwardness that you'll avoid if you go through it out loud.
So go through it out loud, and also with that, another reason why you want to go through it out loud is because however long it takes you to go through it out loud by yourself, I always say subtract at least 5, maybe 10 minutes maybe if the longer your message is actually going to be. You think, this will be 30 minutes. You'll go through it out loud. It's 30 minutes. You preach it for the first time. It's 22 minutes.
Right.
It will be shorter because you're not nervous. Sometimes you'll stop for a second and re-say it or whatever. You'll think as you're talking about, I want to say it this way. So you add time onto it that when you're in front of people, you won't do that.
Yeah, that's good.
So not only does it help you say, does this even sound good? But it gives you a better idea of how long it's actually going to be. So go through it out loud. It's so surprising to me, not in a bad way, but how many people don't do this when they first start. I just would highly recommend go through it out loud.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is something that, obviously Dylan recommended me to do, but I would come to the church when no one was here and do it from stage out loud. And it probably looked crazy if someone were to walk in, but that was the only, if I would have just done it without doing that, it would have been so much different.
One time I do remember I walked in and no one was in here and the auditorium's door were closed. And I knew your car is out there. And I walked inside. I was like, where's Brian?
Hear me whispering from stage. And another thing to add with this before we move on is a good little tip is when you're going through it out loud, time yourself.
Yep.
Because, obviously, like Dylan said, but make sure you have a good time frame because you might think it's short or long and find out it's very much different than you think.
Yeah, in my experience, everyone thinks it's going to be longer than it is when they first do it. So that's number 1. Number 2, preach however is most comfortable. So there's always a debate, what's the best way to preach? No notes, without notes, manuscript, whatever. I preach with no notes, but I use a screen, so it's not like memorize. But, I don't bring anything up with me on stage. But when you first start, you got to learn how to preach before you can find and get improved and all that sort of thing. So if you're someone who wants to bring up a manuscript, bring up a manuscript. If you're someone who wants to just use an outline, just use an outline. Now you may need to, maybe you want to work towards an outline. I don't know that's necessarily the best thing to start with if you've never preached. Honestly, I would recommend having a little bit more notes when you start than not enough because it just keeps you on track. But whatever is most comfortable for you, even if you're allowed to do this, the pulpit in front of you, is it a music stand? Is it a table like this? Whatever is most comfortable for you and appropriate for the church or setting that you're in, do it that way and don't feel like you have to be the best preacher ever your first few times because you'll never be the best preacher ever anyway. But just be comfortable because you're already going to be nervous and thinking through a lot of things and speaking way too fast. So notes, even what you're wearing, again, if it's appropriate to the setting that you're in, the pulpit, whatever that looks like, whatever is most comfortable will help you. So don't feel like you have to have it all figured out when you just begin.
Yeah. Like you said, don't feel like you need to be something you're not. If it's your first time preaching, have it be your first time preaching. You don't have to say it when you get up there, but bring up more than you need to, or over prepare, or don't try and act like this preacher that maybe someone that you really like that you listen to, but that's been preaching for the past 20 years and think you need to do things the same way they do, or they only use a notebook with a few notes, so that's what I need to do, kind of thing. Like, you're you, and it's totally cool for it to be your first time. Yeah. So just be over prepared and do what you need to do.
And it's great to want to get there to use very minimal notes.
Totally.
That was my journey, but it was impossible for me to do that when I first started. There's no way. It would have been a disaster. So do whatever most comfortable, and you'll learn as you go. Don't feel like you have to have it all figured out in the beginning.
And real quick, before I add to that, if you're, how do I put this? If you're starting off, if it's your first time preaching, it's probably not Launch Sunday, or it's probably not your church. Maybe you're guest preaching somewhere else, or you're on staff and working towards that or something like that. Don't feel like you need to do whoever the main person that preaches there does. So in other words, Dylan's the lead pastor here. Myself and a few other guys preach on occasion. But one thing that's always been good is he never said, like, this is the way I do it, and so this is the way that you need to do it, because this is what our people are used to. It's do what you need to do. So I'll bring up a tablet. Dylan used to, doesn't do it anymore. Another guy here brings up a notebook. But it's not, you don't feel like you need to do what that congregation you think is used to, because really they don't care about that kind of stuff. But just do what you need to do.
And you're different anyway. Like, you're a different person. So people aren't necessarily expecting you. A lot of times it's just like we put this pressure on ourselves. Like, no one's expecting you to be and look and sound like the other person, because you're obviously not.
Right.
So preach, however, is most comfortable. Number 3, I guess we kind of briefly mentioned this with the first one, but especially if you're newer, practice in front of people. So don't just practice it out loud, but actually practice in front of people. We did this when Brian, first few times he preached.
It's the worst.
Adam, the first few times he preached. I did it at a church I was at years before we planted New City Church. We had this preaching cohort, and there was like 4 or 5 of us. It sucks.
Yeah.
Like, it's awkward.
It does. Yep.
But if you can do that, it'll make Sundays or whenever you preach better, because you have an idea of. There's one thing to talk through it out loud by yourself. Even if it's just one person listening, you feel the pressure of, I can't like re-say that again, or I can't start over. And it also helps you know how long you're actually going to go.
Yep.
But practice in front of people. It might be awkward, but it's going to be more awkward for you than for them, because like they get it. But it will dramatically help your first few times if the first times you're doing it is actually in front of like a safe space of a few people that can give you feedback, as opposed to doing it for the first time in front of people, which is pretty nerve-wracking. Yeah,
when we did this, it was the worst. I still remember. Like, we did it in front of, it would have been a community group at the time, right? Yeah. But we actually came to the church, so it was however many of us, 7, 8, 9, something like that, and sitting in the auditorium, and me and Adam, who's on staff here, we each gave a message, and it was so awkward, because things that you think are whatever, funny, get a reaction. When there's 9 people there, obviously you're only going to get so much. And also we were bad. Like, I mean, we just were. It was the first time ever doing it for me, at least. But it helped so much. So one thing I would add to this is, if you're listening to this and I assume you want to play in church, you've listened to this or in that world somehow and have never preached, do this now. Like, in other words, don't wait until you're asked and then do this to like test out that message. Just gather some people, write a message on whatever you want, and just do it to be able to figure out what it's like before you're on this time crunch of, I got to figure out how to actually do this thing.
That's a good point. If you want to get some reps in and you don't have a place to do it, like, ask your pastor or some people on staff, hey, can I just do a message for you guys?
Yeah.
You'll get it. You probably will get a yes, because there's no like pressure there. There's no like, it's just an easy way to do it. That's great. Practice in front of people is huge if you're new to preaching.
Yes.
Number 4, we've talked about this various times as well, is you want to have a main point. We talk about this often. We do this at New City Church. We didn't always do this, but you need to have a bottom line, main point, whatever you want to say for your message. You want to give people something that they can actually take and walk away with, because the tendency for new preachers is to give information overload, to give all these sorts of things, which is great, but nobody really knows what they're supposed to take away. And the thing about a bottom line or a main point, whatever you want to call it, is that you actually get to tell people what the point is. So there doesn't have to be ambiguity of like, well, I think this is what's the point, or because people can still learn things whether it's the main point or not. But if you can actually tell people and know what the goal of your message is headed towards, it'll bring clarity to everything you're going to say. Because if you say a main point and it has something to do with your message, well, then you're going to be like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
If you know you're working towards a main point, it'll help you bring clarity to the direction of what you're going. But I would just highly recommend, especially because information overload is the tendency for new preachers. Even if you have too much information, if you have a main point, if you say it's the main point, more likely to connect with people as they're listening.
Yeah, I think this can be a little tough if you're newer or inexperienced, because I know, speaking from my own experience, especially the first couple of times I did, if you're not preaching regularly, then you want people to, and obviously you always do, but I feel like even more so, you want people to learn and remember every word, because you've put so much work into this and like you're not doing this every week. And so probably not really more so, but it feels like you're more just like pouring so much into it, and that you want people to know everything that you just learned or everything that you're preaching on. But you're right. I mean, having that one main point or whatever main point will help them take away something so much more than just trying to give them everything that you have.
It's so funny even listening to you say this, because I don't think about this much, but now I'm like, yeah, when you start out, you want people to know everything that you learned.
Yeah.
It's really hard to cut things out, really hard to be concise, but having a main point will at least guarantee they'll understand something that you're saying when you're first starting out.
That's what you need.
And number 5, again, there's a lot of tips you could give. I would say this: don't listen to just one preacher. Now, I would say, I mean, people say different things. I think it's great to listen to multiple preachers, even to try some of their styles when you're just beginning, because you don't know what you're doing. Like, you don't want to be somebody that you're not. But the only way to know like what you like to do, what you're comfortable with, is to somewhat emulate them.
Yeah.
Not to be them, but I don't know. In my opinion, it's okay to emulate some of your favorite guys in the beginning to find your voice. You don't have to, whatever. The point of this is this, however, that if you just listen, maybe you listen to a couple people, but there's like your favorite. If you just listen to one person primarily, you're going to sound like that one person.
Yeah.
And so if you don't want to sound like that one person, don't just listen to that one person, or take a break from listening to your favorite preacher or whatever. But, don't just listen to one guy, because then you will sound just like that one person, even if you're not trying to.
Yeah, and people might not like that. I don't know. But I would also say if to kind of avoid just copying one person, like I think there's a difference between emulating like mannerisms or emulating people in a certain way versus trying to become them, obviously. Right. And I think one way to avoid that is to listen to people who aren't necessarily from your same world, I guess, whether it's same denomination or same kind of sect of that denomination. We're in the South, so it's very easy just to listen to just Southern Baptist preachers, but like a lot of them do preach very similarly. So to branch out, and I'm not saying to listen to things that you think are wrong if you have convictions that way, but to just people that are from different ages and different backgrounds and things like that, I think helps expose yourself to more in the preaching world, but also helps kind of avoid the just copying this one kind of, cookie cutter thing.
And I said at some point on an episode earlier this year that at the beginning of this year, I did that. I started to download or subscribe. I don't listen to them every week, but every once in a while I'll listen to different pastors. Because if you want to hone the craft of communicating, you can't just listen to people that agree with you even theologically.
Yeah, true.
Like, it's okay to listen to someone who you disagree with strongly, that you would maybe never go to their church, but you can learn from them and how they speak and things that work for them. And so I started to listen, not necessarily just for content, but just to like, okay, what do they do well? What seems to connect well? Like, what are the things that they say, or the ways that they say it, or stories they tell, or whatever?
Yeah.
But listening to a few people will help you not sound like just like one person. And you can try different things out as you like, oh, this person does this, I'm going to try this a few weeks. Well, that worked for me, or that didn't for me.
Yeah.
If you're just listening to one person, you're going to sound like just that one person, even if that's not your goal.
Yep.
So those are 5 tips for new preachers that we would recommend. Again, go through it out loud. Preach however is most comfortable when you're just beginning. Practice in front of people. Have a main point, and don't listen to just one preacher. Hey, if you are new to the Practical Church Planting Podcast, you can find us online at practicalplanting.com. We've got a Facebook group, Practical Church Planting, and you can subscribe wherever, because 15 minutes or less.
That's right. Why wouldn't you?
So thanks for being with us. We'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.